Welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're just going to stand by here until we have all our participants join in. We've got a very busy webinar today. We're expecting about 100 people to join in. So this is the third of our webinar series. But we're just going to stand by a moment. I can just see on the screen that the people are joining in. So we'll just give it a minute. You can probably see up there in on your screen our presenter for today, John, standing by. He's got a fantastic presentation to share with us today. We're all very happy and fortunate to have him with us. Okay, so we'll just give it another 20 or 30 seconds and then we'll get rolling. For those of you on the East Coast, especially in Sydney of Australia today, I think you've got some terrible weather. But like last week, we're very fortunate with these webinars to have people joining us from all over the Asia Pacific and the Americas. So we really are excited that the webinars have been enjoyed by so many people. It's fantastic. Okay, we'll get started. So today is the third in the series of multi-hull solutions webinars that we've started as a way of keeping people engaged and informed over the last number of weeks. And today's presentation is an introduction to offshore cruising from the very experienced John Hembrow. And in the background, helping to administer today's webinar is Rachel. So we'll just jump over there. So my name is Greg Boller. I'm the new yacht sales manager for Multi-Hull Solutions. And Rachel, our marketing manager, has done a fantastic job of putting the presentations together and working with people like John to make this happen. A couple of housekeeping issues as always. On the next slide there, we've got ways for you to communicate with us is to type your questions in the Q&A box, which you should see on your screen. We're going to have a slightly different format today. We're going to try and let John run through his presentation as much as possible without any interruption. But please do keep typing your questions. And John has asked me to let him know if there's some questions that are quite relevant to a section. But mostly, and having seen his presentation, I'm sure that most of today's questions will get answered as he goes through. So if we don't directly answer your question this time around, be patient, and then at the end we'll have a question and answer session. And just a reminder that next week we have another webinar, which is a walkthrough of Lagoon 421. This is focusing in on our brokerage business. So our brokerage team will be doing a walkthrough of one of the many yachts that we have listed for sale in our second-hand stable, as we say. And then the following Friday, on the 5th of June, is the fantastic presentation that we can't wait to have with Michael and Marita Lysart from Let's Dance Sailing, who'll be giving us insider tips for cruising the Mediterranean. Following that, we have a Neil 51 walkthrough, the fantastic Neil Drymaran, which is currently lying in Phuket. Our General Manager, Andrew De Bruin, will be hosting that walkthrough. And then following that, we're going to be catching up with Gordon and Louise Coates, who owned last week's Elba 45. They're going to be giving a chat about their fantastic cruise, or should we say cruise or delivery from France to Australia in 90 days. But for now, let's get started with today's webinar. I'm going to hand over to John Hembrow. John, it's all yours. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Greg and Rachel, for the opportunity to share this session with all those that are viewing, and for all those who are viewing, thank you so much for your interest. Of course, our subject today is an introduction to offshore cruising. The image that you're seeing there in the background is one of the wonderful anchorages that is in the northern or the northeastern part of Fiji in the Lau group. And it is just a picturesque, lovely spot as it's indicated by there. So I'll just start off here. As we go through this, I'm going to share quite a lot of information. It will probably run over time if I'm true to form, but I want to try and give you as much good info as I can. And so please feel free as we're moving through the presentation to take photos of the screen for future reference, or even if you're technologically advanced enough to do screenshots as you go through, because there is some a third-party information available for you to do some own research, as you'll see. So without further ado, we'll get started. If I may, I'll prefix what I'm going to say to you here with this. When setting out on a journey, do not seek advice from someone who never left home. Our experience some 12, 13 years ago when we were preparing to go offshore for the first time, I've got to say I was very, very anxious, frightened is probably the better word, about the prospect of doing what we had planned to do. My wife on the other side was all just excitement and energy. So I was busily talking to anyone who would listen and asking questions of anyone who I could find about what I could expect and what could go wrong and everything else. And what I soon realised was that most of the advice I was getting was being given by people who had actually never been anywhere. And as such, it was opinions rather than information. So I just, when you're talking to people about doing this, maybe just ask the question, where have you been and what have you done, before you take too much of what they say on board. Yacht club bars and those sorts of places are full of well-meaning people that may not necessarily share the right information with you. So just a suggestion. Alrighty, a little bit about us on that topic, because I guess I need to say why I think I'm qualified to be sitting here and sharing information with you. Leanne and I have been full-time liveaboard cruisers for the past 12 years. During that time, we've done about 45,000 nautical miles under our keels on both monohulls and multi-hulls. We've done an east to west Pacific crossing, including the west coast of Central America down to Panama and then across to Fiji, which was a 4-year episode. From the time we left California, where we purchased a vessel, sailed it down the west coast of Central America and then ultimately across the Pacific. We've also been Australia, New Caledonia, Vanuatu, Fiji, and returned 6 times in the last 6 years, and New Caledonia to New Zealand at once as well. We returned to Australia in 2014, funnily enough, and that was going to be the end of our adventures. We'd chosen to have 5 years off and do this. We moved back into a normal home, so to speak, and tried to come back to the real world, and it just didn't work out. We just found we didn't fit in so much anymore. People would be interested in what we had to say when they asked us what we'd been doing, but after a few minutes they would glaze over. They just really had no concept of what it was, and we badly missed our cruising community connections. But we also needed to find a way to be able to buy anti-foul and beer while we were continuing to do what we do. So we decided to start the Down Under Rally. So we purchased songlines in 2014 and started the rallies in 2015. And that's been our life for the last 5 years. So why offshore cruising? For me, for us, it was the lure of adventure. It was the convenience. I'm not one who particularly likes to live out of a suitcase, and I'm not big on flying, aka control freak. So the opportunity to be able to move around at our own pace, with all of our comforts of home with us and not having to dig into a suitcase everyone would change of clothes, that was a big appeal for me. The freedom of being able to choose to stay or go when we got to where we had chosen to go to, and found out it didn't actually stack up to what we had hoped, or we fell in love and wanted to stay longer. And then the thing that I wasn't aware of but has become the major attraction for us is being part of the international cruising community, and even the local cruising community for that matter. So there's just a few quick shots of 12 years of adventures. Is quite the feeling when you're hoisting the courtesy flag for the next country that you're going into, and the apprehension of all the things you're going to experience. Provisioning the boat for those sorts of passages, like the 3,300 mile one from the Marquesas, the Galapagos Islands to the Marquesas, 21 days at sea. You know, all the wonderful things that we were able to experience and the wonderful people we experienced them with over that time. That's, for us, offshore cruising and why it appeals. I'm sure everyone's got their own thoughts about it and dreams, but it is a wonderful way to travel, and it is a very social way of traveling. Okay, some frequently asked questions, and these are the questions that we're most asked. First one would be, am I ready to go offshore? Is my boat suitable and ready? Is it dangerous? What does it cost? And surprisingly enough, what about pirates? So I'll answer the last one first, and I can say that these are the only pirates we've ever seen in our travels. It just really depends where you're going to be going as to what the likelihood of you encountering a true piracy situation is. There are some hot spots, and I'll share some information with you a little later as to how you would find out where those hot spots are and what precautions or measures you need to take in those areas, but it wouldn't amount to 1% of the cruising grounds that are available to us. So yeah, that's just it's not a myth, I guess, but it's not as common as people think. But it is one that a lot of people are concerned about. So moving on, what does it cost to cruise? Which is another very frequent question we're asked. I try and ask this question in response, and is it, are you a sailor who cruises, such as our friend here, Connor, who has this 28-foot boat and sailed it across the Pacific solo, and did it on a very minimalistic scale, but he really enjoyed the sailing. He was in it for the sailing more so than the cruising, and he was able to do it on a shoestring budget with little maintenance needed, and you know, very efficiently. He still got to see all the same things we saw. He still got to have all the same experiences we had. So, you know, he's a true sailor that wanted to go on a cruise. But many of us are more cruisers who sail, and that would be the category we fit into. I'm certainly not a sailor. I don't profess to be a sailor, and to be honest with you, I don't even much like sailing. The sailing for us became a necessity because we wanted to be able to travel long distances, and I couldn't afford the fuel to do it in a motorboat. So we had to learn to sail, and that happened only a couple of years really before we headed off. So we're a cruiser. I'm a cruiser who sails, and we love all the convenience and the comfort and the tricks and the toys and everything else. I think in regard to costs, it's once you've set up and you've got the boat ready and you've done everything, it's not that of an expensive lifestyle apart from the vessel maintenance. It's more about what your lifestyle is now as to what it's going to be then. And it's very similar. If you like to go out and have coffee and have meals out and, you know, you like to do those things, then they're all available to you, and you'll still sort of spend the same amount of money on those things as you will do when you're at home. Others find that they don't want to do that, and they're quite happy to just spend most of their time, if not all of their time, on the boat, sailing around and hanging out in lovely anchorages. And so, of course, they spend very little when they leave and whilst they're away. I guess another way to ask the question is, are you going to be cruising or camping? And that's a big thing. We have a lot of people that, again, do this on a very shoestring budget and have a great amount of fun. But, you know, they don't have a lot of the luxuries that most of us have. And, you know, when you're doing this for a weekend and you're camping, it's sort of fun and an adventure. But when you start to do it for 3, 4, 5 or 6 months or longer, and you haven't got your coffee machine and you haven't got all those things that you enjoy when you're not cruising, sometimes it becomes a bit of a chore for some people and they miss those conveniences. So it's about the personal choices, how you want to live, what lifestyle you want to lead whilst you're cruising, if that all makes sense. The cost to offshore cruise. So I'll preface that with this. It's always tickled my fancy. The most expensive way to get somewhere for free would be sailing. If we're going to go offshore from Australia, the first thing we must have is Australian registration for our vessel. This is entirely different to your state registration, and it is an additional cost. However, it's a one-off cost. Once you have this Australian registration, it's not an annual fee, but it is going to cost you somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000. I think the application is just over $1,500 on its own. And it's quite a process. I haven't got the time here to explain it to you now, but it will take, a minimum of a month. Most people find 3 months, and some people even longer, to make the application, gather the information that's required, have it processed, and go through all of the steps that result in you getting a Australian registration certificate. That Australian registration certificate is necessary for you to be able to get an outward clearance to leave the country. So if you want to sail offshore, you have to go to customs, and we exit the country through Australian Border Force, immigration, just the same as we would if we were flying away, and we get a certificate. If we try and arrive at another country without that outward clearance certificate, they won't let us into that country. So we just become wandering around the ocean endlessly. So we must have our Australian registration in order to get our outward clearance to gain inward clearance to our next destination. Vessel insurance. Look, and these things I'm going through here are sometimes the difference between people having joined our rally and then having withdrawn from the rally prior to us departing. They just didn't know the extent of the costs they were going to incur to prepare, and sometimes they've had to defer their choice to go on the rally till the next year whilst they got some more funds together. Insurance has become an increasingly big component of that situation now, especially after all the hurricane activity they had in the USA and Europe over the last few years. The insurance for offshore cruising is going to be somewhere between 2 and 2.5% of the sum insured. So, it's significant. If we've got a $500,000 vessel and we're looking to insure it for the 12 months, you could find yourself with a premium of circa $10,000, especially if it's your first offshore cruising passage. So, before you make the decisions and too many commitments, spending money on getting the boat ready, you might want to just make sure that these things are all in your budget. Then there's travel insurance. And again, another thing that is really important to understand, that you need suitable cover. We've had instances where people have been injured on their boat on their way to their destination, and arrived in their destination and sought medical attention, only to find that their travel insurance wasn't going to cover that, because the incident actually didn't happen in the country that they were getting treated in. It happened whilst they were at sea, and their policy didn't cover them for medical repatriation and or assistance whilst they were at sea. It only covered them whilst they were in country. So travel insurance for offshore cruising is a different kettle of fish altogether than what it is for just your normal aeroplane travel and country visits. Crew preparation. Look, this varies between 1,000 to 2,000 beyond per person. Again, when we take into account the travel insurance, plus we need to buy our life jackets, and we need to do some training, and we need to buy a personal EPIRB or a personal AIS or whatever, which we're going to talk about. These things all add up. So, it can get to be a significant sum. And then, of course, we've got the vessel preparation, and that's really going to depend on the vessel that you have or the vessel that you buy. But oftentimes, in order to get insurance, the insurance company may ask you to re-rig the vessel, and that can be a $10,000 to $12,000 or more spend right there just to put new rigging on it. And then if we need to equip it with more equipment for sustainable offshore cruising, solar panels, wind generators, water makers, all those sorts of things. So again, these are the things that have been a barrier for some of the people who have joined our rallies in the past. It hasn't stopped them going, it's just deferred their plans. Okay, another one we get asked is cruising dangerous? I'll ask you the similar question by asking, is staying at home dangerous? There's this little cartoon that I really love. We met these guys that are the subject of the cartoon on the boat Convivia in French Polynesia. So it's a real story. And Sarah Steenland, the cruising cartoonist, has come up with this little cartoon asking Tucker on his boat if he was going to sail around the world with his family and was that dangerous. And Tucker responds by saying, either one of us may die tomorrow. I may be swept from the decks and drowned. You may hit a bus on your way to work. If I succeed, I'll snorkel, hike, and truly live in paradise. If you succeed, you'll get to work. So how do we succeed? We succeed by minimising the risk. And that means we need to be informed and prepared. So how do we go about doing that? Again, I'll ask the question, do you know what you don't know? And it's a strange question to ask, but it becomes a question that the question has come as a result of people who have sailed with us on the rallies, who have said to us at the other end, wow, I didn't know what I didn't know. I wish I had have known. So what are some of the things you need to make sure you do know? Safety gear, offshore communications, emergency procedures, weather forecasting, and offshore sailing techniques for catamarans and monohulls. These are just some of the subjects that you really need to get across and have a good understanding of before you set off. And look, bad experiences, we hear all the horror stories about people having bad voyages and all sorts of things, that their ocean travels were scary and all the tales that get told at the bar. The most common reason for bad experiences in our experience is one of these things, a calendar, and sailing to a schedule in order to meet somebody at the airport because they're flying in to come with you, to join you for 3 weeks on a holiday. And all of a sudden we start moving around and trying to desperately get to where we're going to pick them up and cause our boats damage and ourselves emotional scars, let's say. So sailing to a schedule is the biggest factor for having bad experiences. It's lovely to have your family and friends come and visit you. I will say, however, that guests on boats are a little bit like fish, in that they go off after 3 days. It can get a little old sharing your space with people who are especially not nautically inclined. But yeah, lovely to have them come and visit. So we always say to them, look, you come and be prepared to have to stay in a hotel when you get there in case we haven't been able to get there. And if we can get there when you're there, we'd love to have you come and join us. If not, just have a lovely holiday anyway. That's how we approach that. It's as a result of bad experiences we've had that has seen us have to adopt that approach. Remembering that we are very much not in control of many things when we're offshore cruising and sailing, and the weather is the biggest factor in those things that we're not experienced in. So what can you do to avoid these experiences? We need to be patient. We need to sail when it's suitable to sail. We need to make our voyages when it's suitable to make those voyages. We need to not have schedules, so we need to be patient in order to get to where we're going. We need to understand weather forecasts. And look, so many people say, oh, we had a terrible passage because the weather forecast was wrong. And, sometimes it is, but by and large, it's often the interpretation of the weather forecast that was wrong, not necessarily the forecast. So that comes down to understanding weather forecasts and understanding weather routing and how to use that weather routing information to help you avoid bad experiences. I'm talking about passage planning, and passage planning is when we're sitting here in our marina and we're looking at the weather, getting ready to go and trying to choose a suitable weather window to depart on. And that's when we be patient and we just wait until we get the opportunity to leave that's consistent with the sort of voyage that we would like to have. But then we have passage management. And what that means is, okay, we've headed off on a 7-day voyage and we've got a weather forecast that said it's going to look good for 7 days. But the reality of that is it's really only really accurate for the first 3 days or so. Beyond that, it is a bit of a guess. It's an opinion. It's a forecast. It's not written in stone. So we need to be flexible enough to be able to manage any changes in the weather that happen whilst we're at sea. And that's what passage management is all about. And there's some tools you can use to help you do that. So whilst we're talking about the weather, I would encourage you to start looking at weather maps and get the feel for what they're telling you. There's an enormous amount of really great information available electronically through all sorts of programs and Windy TY and Predict Wind and all of these wonderful things. But if something were to happen that you couldn't get access to that stuff, you know, you need to go old school, and pretty much we can get these sorts of files or maps on demand most of the time, but you need to know what they're telling you. So when you start watching the news and you start to see the weather chart come up, start to take some interest in what a high pressure system down in the Great Australian Bight or between Tasmania and New Zealand is going to do, how that high pressure system is going to affect the weather up on the east coast of Australia. What this SPCZ means up here in red, and it's the South Pacific Convergence Zone, and what impact is that going to have on the weather up in the islands? This is a great tool to be able to get a snapshot of what you can expect to happen without all of the detail, but it's something that you really should, you know, I encourage you to start taking an interest in. As for the electronic stuff, look, we couldn't do what we do without this. This is the Predict Wind Offshore app, which is coupled with a satellite Iridium Go connection and provides us with on-demand weather 24/7, no matter where we are. There's a wonderful video. I shouldn't say it's wonderful, I created it, but I think it's wonderful. That's had about 4,000 views on our YouTube channel. That actually shows us using this product, this software, the satellite comms, to download some weather on a passage we did from New Caledonia to Fiji and avoid a significant storm that popped up behind us that wasn't forecast when we departed. It takes about 9 minutes to watch it, and it's pretty explanatory. I think you'll find that that will shed some light on just how you can use this stuff to your advantage, and how it's made doing what we do so much safer. The other interesting thing is people often say to me, oh, we're going to sail from Australia to Tahiti. And I mean, who wouldn't? But there's the trade wind factor, and there's some routes that you really need to be aware of as to why you can and can't do those things comfortably. You can do anything you like, but whether you can do it comfortably and safely, that's a whole nother thing. Pilot charts are a really great way to plan your voyages. And a pilot chart, for those that don't know, looks something like this. I'd recommend this one from Jimmy Cornell. I don't know if you've heard of Jimmy Cornell, but he is the guru of ocean sailing, cruising anyway. And he's produced this pilot chart, Jimmy Cornell's Ocean Atlas, and it's got the wind and current for every month of the year and every ocean of the world. Provides a snapshot of what you can expect at any given time of the year. So in the little image there, you can see passages to Panama and Pacific destinations in the month of February, and which way the winds are going to be blowing. So when we're looking at this thing, each of these wind roses covers a 5 to 10 degrees square of longitude and latitude, along with the distribution of the winds that prevail in that area from 8 cardinal points, etc., etc. So if you look at the wind feathers on the end of the arrows, you'll see they show the Beaufort force wind scale. And I've just got a little snap of that over there of what the Beaufort force wind scale means in our world. And a Beaufort force wind scale of 6 is going to see us having, you know, 22 to 27 knots of wind. The other thing it does is give you the prevailing winds. And in the area, so the longer of the arrows is the most prominent wind at that time at that location. So if the prevailing wind is greater than the ability for the arrow to show the length, they put a percentage in there. So 47% of the time in this instance, the wind's going to be coming from the west at whatever speed it is. And then they go into the center of it and they say, and in the figure in the center gives the percentage of calms or the percentage of storms. So it's a really good snapshot of what you can expect. And that in itself would tell you, going to Tahiti from Australia is not going to be an easy thing to do. So with the Beaufort wind scale in mind, I think most of us can probably more relate to this. And if we look at this one, we go from force 1 being boredom to force 5 being delight, right up through to force 11 being I want my money. So the Beaufort wind scales are a bit of fun there. Okay, how are we going, Greg?
Yeah, you're going really good, John. No questions that well, one question there was just about using agents to do your registration and things like that just came in earlier in the discussion. But let's cover that when we get to the end.
Excellent. I hope everyone's finding this enjoyable. I'm certain I'm going to go over time, but we want to get through as much as we can. So we'll push on. So we're going to talk about a couple of different things here, preparing the people and preparing the vessel. I've tried to break this up into two sections. And look, this is far from comprehensive. It's just an insight. We do a offshore cruising preparation course that takes 2 days, 2 full days, 8 till 5 p.m. in a room. And we go through this in great detail. But this is just an insight for you. So one of the major problems that, believe it or not, our Go East Rally participants have is seasickness. And many of them say they've never been seasick in their life before. Yet they get a couple of hours out of the seaway here and they're actually incapacitated within the first 12 hours as a result of violently being seasick. A story that's not so funny for the people involved, but was funny for us. One of the guys who joined the rally last year, his wife was so keen to do this, have this adventure. He was never really the motivator for it. He was just going along with her because she wanted to do it and he wanted her to have the experience. So he hired a professional skipper and his brother-in-law who'd been a trawler operator and his wife and him, and they had another fella there, 5 of them on the boat, and he figured that he was just going to lie down and read a book the whole way. And these other guys would look after what needed to be done to get them there. Well, as it turned out, he was the only one on the boat that wasn't seasick for the whole trip. And he did most of the watches and most of the passage planning and management. So, you know, it can strike people at different times in different ways. I just encourage you to research some seasickness remedies, and I would strongly encourage you to use those remedies before you go offshore. Some people find that some of the remedies make them sick, even when they're just in calm water. Others find that they make them so sleepy they can't function, and then taking them is actually worse than the ailment. So just do some, even if you've not been seasick before, see what you can do about having some medication that works for you, doesn't make you feel sick, but may help you avoid being sick. The other thing that I get a bit criticised for sometimes, well, I'll say it anyway, is I do believe that seasickness is a lot to do with anxiety, and it often explains why people that have never been seasick before get seasick when they're looking down the barrel of a 7-day or 6 days and night passage across the ocean for the first time. And you know, I personally had never been seasick before we left to go to New Caledonia the first time, and we'd done up and down the Queensland coast many times, up to Lizard Island and back, never ever been seasick. The first 3 days after Cape Morton disappeared into the abyss, I was violently ill for 3 days, and fortunately I had a guy on the boat with me and my wife who was able to take up my slack. I was absolutely incapacitated. I've never been sick again. And I do know that I was very apprehensive about that voyage. So, fact or fiction, I'll leave it to you to decide. Man overboard. Avoidable? Yes, it does. Yet it does happen. I mean, we've probably all seen this sad situation this week that happened up in Mooloolaba there. A very experienced sailor sails the boat all the way from the USA, you know, obviously knows his stuff, and yet meets his end, you know, the way he did. Oftentimes it's the most experienced people that this happens to, because we get complacent, and I know that I am absolutely guilty of that. I just think, oh, I'll just duck forward and deal with that. And I don't do the things that I should do to make sure that I don't fall off the boat. It is so avoidable. I go as far as to say it's 100% avoidable, but it does happen. What we need to be aware of is the fact that if it does happen, are we going to be able to get these people back on the boat if we are not just a single-hander? If you're a single-hander, well, it's not looking good. And one of our mates, Nigel Longster, who's happily given me permission to share this little experience with you, this was last year, and he's sailing along to Yamba, and he's doing something with his boom to avoid a jibe, and the swell picks up the boat and suddenly swings to starboard and finds himself in the water. And he managed to still have hold of the preventer that he was trying to put in place to stop the jibe, and was being body dragged along behind the boat, hanging onto this preventer that was still attached to the boom. Fortunately, it ended well. His partner was able to get him back on board the boat, but he did say it's the most stressful 20 minutes he's ever had, and for her as well. So, you know, we need to make sure that we know what we're going to do if we do find ourselves in this situation. Imagine that happens in the middle of the night. You know, it gets exponentially more difficult. So with that in mind, crew preparation. I think anyone that makes an offshore passage without having done sea survival training workshop is asking for trouble. The first time you should be trying to get into a life draft isn't in the middle of the night in 2 or 3 meters of swell, when you're frightened and it's all gone to hell in a handbasket. When you do first trying to get into one of these things, you're going to realize just how much of a challenge it is to get into them. And to have done that in a controlled environment in calm water is going to make it that much easier when you do actually, when you do actually have to do it for real. Man overboard recovery skills are taught in the same sea survival training workshop. And then the next thing is first aid. And we need to make sure that at least 2 people on the boat are capable and competent in delivering emergency first aid. Should someone be unlucky enough, again, as happened in our rally last year, only 6 or 7 hours out of the seaway, someone fell down a companionway and dislocated their shoulder, broke their arm. There were only 1 of 2 people on the boat, and that boat had to be sailed back to the Gold Coast single-handed, as well as get this person comfortable and look after them, you know, during that. And they fortunately had done the first aid course, and they were able to deal with it, and it was all ended well. But these things happen. Okay, if we're going to talk about man overboard and recovering them, we need to have some equipment. We need to know what equipment we should have relevant to our boat. I'm not going to get into the pros and cons of each one of these. If you would like to find out more about them, you can see down at the bottom of the slide there, there's a link to our website where we give some more information about these items. But, you know, essentially all of the ones that you're seeing on the screen, we consider to be an essential item to have on board if you're making offshore passages. And look, your safety gear, personal safety gear, just on this, I'd like to ask a question. Does your PFD have a crutch strap and a tether attachment? The PFDs come in all shapes and forms and prices and whiz-bang gadgets, but the bottom line is they need to have a crutch strap and they need to have a secure attachment point for your harness. Those are the 2 key factors. And then, of course, the Newton rating of them, make sure that they can actually keep you buoyant when you are perhaps in your wet weather gear and all the other things that are going to weigh you down. So as they used to say, oils ain't oils, PFDs ain't PFDs. And 2 of the things that you must make sure that you have is this crutch strap and a tether. And I would encourage you, again, the first time you should be in the water with an inflated PFD is not in the middle of the night in a storm. I would encourage you to just put yours on and jump in the water with it and feel what it's like to have this thing discharge and slip up around your head, and how uncomfortable it is if it's not the right one and it's not well suited to your body shape and mass. And then think about the fact that you could actually be in that thing for hours. Yeah, it's food for thought. Personal safety equipment, again, which one? Personal EPIRB, personal RIS, what's the benefits of each one? You know, should we have both? Should we have one or the other? And if we're going to have one or the other, which one should we choose over the other? We go into great detail about this again in the Offshore Cruising Prep course we do. But the bottom line is we have chosen personal AIS over a personal EPIRB, purely because we've got our EPIRB on the boat. and it's set up so that regardless of what happens to the boat, that EPIRB is going to be deployed and activated, and I'll talk to you about how that happens later. We can manually activate that EPIRB should someone go overboard, and because they've got a personal AIS device, when they go overboard, we are going to get a signal to our AIS letting us know, A, that person has gone overboard, B, where that person currently is, and assist us to return to the position that person is in as a result of the transmission of the AIS data. It will also alert other vessels in the area that someone's in the water, and they can also respond if the weather conditions and everything is consistent with them doing so. If there was a aeroplane involved as a spotter plane, again, they've got the AIS signal and it's live and it's active. Whereas the EPIRB is going to a satellite, it's not going to the local communication. So our choice, very short answer, has been the personal AIS over the personal EPIRB. But if you can afford both, you know, you only get one go at saving your life. Essential navigation skills, again, another one that we continually asked is, should I have paper charts on the boat? Short answer, yes, but they're no good having them if you don't know what to do with them. So a navigational course to ensure that you at the very least can take a position from your GPS and plot it onto the paper chart and know where you are at any given point in time, and then be able to get from that point to wherever it is you're going without the aid of a GPS. So in the instance that we might be sailing across the ocean, we're unfortunate enough to have a lightning strike, all our electronics are gone, we've got our logbook and our last known position, which we filled out 3 hours ago. We can pop that onto our chart and say, righto, this is where we were 3 hours ago, we'd be doing 6 knots. You know, what's the heading that we've got to take now in order to get to our destination? That's the minimum skill that you need to have. And a navigation course is going to give you that and a whole lot more. If you haven't done one, don't go out there without it. These things are unlikely, but they do happen. And if they do happen, it's pretty critical that you can get to where you're supposed to be and that you know where you are. Okay, the other thing we're going to do is, because we're going to go to all these wonderful destinations, is coral reef navigation. And I'm sure many of you have already done this up and down the Queensland coast. Some of you might have done it offshore. But for instance, in Fiji, the charts in Fiji are woefully inaccurate. It's not uncommon. In fact, it's commonplace for the chart to show a reef on the chart plotter that is 50 metres or 100 metres off the beam of the boat. And yet when I look, I can't see it. And it's not even there. Conversely, it's not uncommon for me to look off the beam of the boat or ahead of the boat and see a reef, look at the chart plotter, and it's not on there. So we need to be able to use our skills to navigate in these coral reef lagoon areas or coral reef areas by knowing what the water depth looks like. And is there enough water for us to continue through there? Is that water shallow, deep, 1 metre, half a metre, 2 metres? And a good pair of polarized sunglasses, along with good overhead light, and travelling around at the right time of day is critical to successfully navigating in these areas. Again, there's boats every year, and not one or two, more than 10, historically every year, that are grounded in Fiji, for instance, and Vanuatu for that matter. And many of those are lost because there's simply not the ability to recover them. Again, these are the reasons why your insurance starts to get so expensive, because if the boat goes aground in these locations, remote locations, the insurance company's not going to be able to salvage it. It's a write-off. So this is all the stuff that's contributing to the cost, and it's all the things that you need to make sure that you're on top of. Watchkeeping and safety protocols. I'll just check in with Greg. How are we doing, Greg?
Yeah, very well. And we've got some really good questions coming through, John, that we'll cover at the end. But so let's make sure we save some time for a good Q&A session.
All right, mate. I'm at 45 minutes, and I've probably still got plenty to go. But we'll just keep going. You tell me when we've got to finish.
Well, you've got no one has left, John, and we're getting lots of feedback that people are really well engaged.
All right, awesome. We'll keep going. Thank you. So, watchkeeping and safety protocols. Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. We've had people actually ask us, where do you anchor at night time when you're sailing to New Caledonia? Not once, several times. They haven't actually got the concept of this is a multi-day, multi-night ocean passage that we can't stop anywhere in 4,000 metres of water. So we're sailing 24/7. And with that comes another challenge, which is fatigue and managing the boat, especially when we're shorthanded. And by shorthanded, I mean 2 people. So how do we manage our watch keeping and safety protocols? Watch schedules are imperative to successfully managing this boat whilst we're on passage, any boat whilst you're on passage. And many people have many different ideas about this. And look, at the end of the day, it's what works for you. We've got friends, very experienced friends, I might add, that one of the partners does all of the daylight hours and the other partner does the entire night hours. That's how they like to do it. That's what's worked for them over many thousands of miles. And I would never criticize them for choosing to do what works for them, but they've had a whole lot of time to work out what does work and doesn't work. I would try and encourage you to have the most experienced person on the vessel, or the person that knows the vessel itself the best, well rested as possible at all times. Because when it does go to hell, or there's an issue, that's the person that's going to be relied on to get you to the other side. And if that person has been sleep deprived, is suffering from sleep deprivation, their decision making can be, let's say, compromised. So, important, in our opinion, a vessel runs best on passage if daily tasks and watch keeping are well organised and roles clearly defined. This includes meal preparation, cooking, machinery and deck inspections. Choose a watch system and a routine that works for you, for your crew, based on your experience levels and skill sets. The number of crew will, of course, influence the watch schedule. A single night watch, again, world according to John, I believe, a single night watch should never be longer than 3 hours, purely because of the fatigue factor and the impaired decision-making that could go with it. And organised watches should continue during daylight hours. Often people say to us, we don't really want to run a watch system during daytime. Whoever's up will be on watch. Works for them, doesn't work for us. Okay, crew considerations, which comes into the topic of watch keeping. Are they crew or passengers? We've learnt that there's a difference. And some, again, have a absolute enthusiasm to make an ocean passage and have this experience of a lifetime, yet they have no real value in the process, and they become a passenger rather than a crew member. I would encourage you, before you set off, and again, we see it on the rally often, people have got guys coming to join them as crew. We're going to leave on the 1st of May, and these people rock up for the first time, and in many cases, they meet them for the first time the day before. Let's just say that there has been a number of mutinies as a result, and I've been pressured to get immigration processes done very quickly at the other end, because these guys want off that boat and on their way home. So, yeah, look, crew. Are they crew? Are they passengers? Because if they're passengers, it can get to be a bit of a challenge. The other thing is, crew and related vessel considerations, sorry. Vessel type and performance. That photo, by the way, sorry, I even cracks myself up, is one from a particularly challenging passage we did from Newcastle to Fiji 6 years ago, where I really found out what I didn't know the hard way. And fortunately, I had those 2 clowns with me, and it made it all that much easier. Vessel type and performance. How many crew are actually required to run the boat? Because we need to have at least that many people. The accommodation and layout of the boat, is it consistent with having 6 people aboard? Is everybody going to have a berth and a comfortable place to call their own, or are we going to be hot berthing? That is, sharing beds. And is the galley equipped to be able to deal with these people? Is there comfortable space for them to relax whilst they're off watch? All these things we need to take into account when we're deciding how many people we're going to take along with us as crew or passengers on an ocean voyage. the suitability of the vessel safety equipment. And I'm going to talk about this further in life rafts, but I'll do it now. If we've got a 4-person life raft as our raft for our vessel, and we've got 6 people on board, well, obviously we're going to need a 6-person life raft. So we go off and buy a 6-person life raft, but when we're coming back home, we decide to do it shorthanded with just 2 of us. That 6-person life raft is not suitable for 2 people, and we'll talk about why. So we need to make some decisions about, is our vessel safety equipment up to the stuff? Are we going to ask these people to buy their own PFDs that are going to cost them circa $400 with crutch straps and all the things? Are they going to have their own AIS devices, AIS and overboard devices, wet weather gear, tethers, SAFs, etc., etc., etc.? Or are we going to spring for all that stuff? It's all stuff, questions that you need to ask and address. Extra water consumption. You double the number of people on the boat, you double the amount of water that you need to have on the boat available when you're on passage. So does that mean we're going to need a water maker, and we're going to perhaps have to stop along the way to make more water? Extra power consumption. You'd be absolutely amazed what happens to your battery bank when 3 or 4 iPads, iPhones, laptops get plugged in to recharge them after everyone's been watching movies all night off watch. The effect of the extra weight of the crew members and their personal items and provisions. Can I bring my bike, my surfboard, my guitar? All of these things, especially if we're sailing performance catamarans, have an effect on the vessel's performance and the comfort of the voyage. So lots of stuff to consider. I've done an article on this. Again, it's available to people who choose to do our offshore cruising prep course that really gets into the nitty gritty of it. So yeah, look at that. Look, sorry, I just want to go back. Preparing the people. So communicating with each other. The next thing that turns the dream into a nightmare, oftentimes we find ourselves sharing a small space with our significant other when we've never ever spent that much time together before in a lifetime. And we can start to grate on each other, especially when it's not sunshine and lollipops, let's say. So communicating with each other is a really key thing to get right. I'm sure we've all at some time had to say, I'm sorry for what I said when we were trying to dock the boat. Always a way to spend an entertaining afternoon. Do you think, Greg?
Totally. Yeah, sorry, I was just writing down a question there from Arno, but we've got some good questions for you at the end of this.
Oh, well, let's get through it. So communicating with each other, I just wanted to, look, there's some wonderful things like marriage savers. You may have seen them, or they call them marriage savers, but they're Bluetooth headphone devices that the person driving the boat is wearing and the person on the bow is wearing, and they're able to communicate with each other by speaking with no breakdown in the communication, and it works really well. I love using all this electronic stuff as a backup. It's never my primary form of communication because in my experience in the environment that we live in, this stuff doesn't last long. So what can we do if we don't have the aid of these electronic gadgets? We should discuss, agree, and practice using some hand signals that can be used to communicate with each other without speaking, or sometimes known as yelling. So I'm not going to go through them all, but again, if you're taking screenshots or photos, you might want to do a version of this. I'm not saying this is the be all and end all, but just think about how you're going to be able to communicate with each other with hand signals to do those sorts of tasks. Slow down, speed up, drop the anchor, go to port, go to starboard. There's been boats that have run aground because they're trying to navigate through a coral reef system, and the skipper thought that the person on the bow was pointing where they wanted them to go, but in fact the person on the bow was pointing at the thing they were trying not to hit. So we need to make sure that we're communicating well. Alrighty, my biggest fear, and this is my personal biggest fear, is what will happen if the captain, aka me, became injured, unconscious, or worse whilst at sea. And by that I mean, can the people on the boat competently sail, motor, whatever they need to do to get this boat to the other end without my input? We all need to have a captain, and that is, again, something we talk about why it's important to have a captain, but they can't be the only person that knows how to sail that boat. You can't just be a passenger and a captain. You need to be a captain with a competent crew member. So I would encourage you, if you're short-handed sailing as a couple, that you really ensure that both of you have got the skills to, at the very least, get that boat to the other end. It doesn't need to be pretty, it just needs to get there. So give some thought to that.
Very valid.
With that in mind, we've created a written procedure for our vessel, songlines, which everybody that boards the boat it's required reading. And it's got, as you'll see it go through here, abandoned ship procedures, the life raft, man overboard procedures, how to use the Dan buoy in a rescue situation, you know, all sorts of things that are going to assist someone if they had to get a reference whilst they found themselves having to navigate or run the vessel, right down to how to lower the sails on a catamaran, how to reef the sails, when to reef the sails. It's all well and good to say, I showed you how to do that, but when we're tired and our decision-making is compromised and we're emotional, we may not be able to recall all this information. And to have a reference thing here, yeah, it makes me feel comfortable anyway. And Leanne reads it, or doesn't read it necessarily because she's read it many times, but she reviews it each time before we depart. I myself go back through it, and every other person on the boat's required to read it. So look, you mightn't be as anal as me. You know, it's all just suggestions, things that have worked for us over the time we've been doing this, and things that we've learned as a result of mistakes we've made. Alrighty, is my boat suitable and ready?
Good picture.
That's an actual photograph, by the way. I mean, look, how much stuff do you take? What do you need to take? What's necessary? What's not necessary? Do you know what you don't know about what you should have? You know, it's endless how much stuff you can take and how much you do to get the boat ready. Things like light air sails, you know, are they necessary for the voyage that we're going to go on? And is our have I got enough crew on board to be able to manage that sail, or am I going to be risking ourselves in the ocean using that sail because of being short-handed? Is my navigation station up to the task? Is everything clearly available, information there for everything? The handheld VHF radio, remote control mic at the helm, so that we can have the VHF on and still actually hear someone calling us, rather than just having a VHF down in the saloon that when it's on, it's keeping everybody inside the boat awake, but the person at the helm can't hear it or interact with it. So, you know, having a remote mic at your helm or wherever you pilot the boat from, again, it's a must for me, because we've got to have that radio on 24/7 in order to assist someone else, perhaps, should they be in distress and we receive a call, a ship calling us up, whatever. And your deck hardware, you know, is it clearly laid out so that it can be used and referenced by everyone? It's all well and good to say, hey, could you tighten up reef number 1? Which one's that? Oh, it's the pink one with the green spots on it, and it's dark, or the rope's faded, or whatever. If, when you're setting up your boat to do this, the simple things make all the difference. And just marking and identifying each of the blocks and what their role is was a huge difference for us. We couldn't buy you'll see there I've scratched the number 3 onto the reefing line, because you couldn't buy a sticker that said Reef 3. So we had to make our own. This sort of thing has changed our sailing and made it that much more enjoyable and less confrontational. Man overboard, just quickly touching on this again, I said it's preventable, and it is, but you need to make sure you've got the right stuff in place to prevent it happening. One of the things that's almost as bad as going overboard is going overboard and finding yourself bashing up against the side of the boat while everyone else is asleep and being beaten to death, or semi-submerged as the boat continues to career along in the ocean at 6 knots. So layout of your jack lines on your deck, making sure that should you stumble and be tethered, that you don't find yourself still overboard but attached to the boat. There's a lot to know here. Again, you need to know what you don't know and then research it and get the answers. In this day and age we live in with the internet, there's no reason for not being able to learn this stuff. It's just amazing what a Google search will reveal. Okay, EPIRBs, making the right choice, and that comes down to, is it GPS enabled? Should I have it GPS enabled? Is it water activated? Should it be water activated? Is it HRU equipped, hydrostatic release unit? Is it obstacle-free deployment? So in the instance that the boat sank very quickly, could the EPIRB actually float to the surface, or would it go down with the boat? The GPS enabled unit, why is that important? And basically the response time is the percentage is extraordinarily quicker than if it wasn't a GPS enabled unit. Do the research on this stuff, satisfy yourself as to why and which one of these you should have. I certainly would be suggesting you have one that has all of those features. Life rafts, we talked about it a little bit earlier. Are they necessary? Believe it or not, and many people have asked us in the past, because it's one of the conditions of joining the rally is that you have to have a life raft. They say, why is it necessary? I've got an inflatable dinghy. That will be my life raft. You know, we're going to talk about dinghies shortly, but when your dinghy's passage ready and lashed to your davits or upside down on your deck, and the boat is compromised quickly, you need to be able to deploy this thing quickly. And if that dinghy is all tied up and stuck under the davits and all sorts of things as it should be prepared for passage, you may not be able to deploy it quick enough. So look, yes, life raft, as far as we're concerned, absolutely necessary. The types of them, you can get a canister one, you can get a valise one. What's the difference, and why would you choose to have a valise over a canister? Valise being the one you see down in the bottom right-hand corner, the blue one, and the canister being the other two. Why does size matter? We talked about why you should have the you know, if we've got a 6-man life raft on our boat and there's only 2 people aboard, the buoyancy of that life raft is compromised. It's actually too buoyant because there hasn't got the mass of the weight mass in it that it was designed to carry, and it could find itself surfing and capsizing and all sorts of things should we be in a bad seaway and in the raft. So size matters. Why is the location of it critical? Again, you'll see a picture of the monohull there where the life raft's nicely secured underneath the boom, which is all fine and dandy, unless, of course, we happen to be unlucky enough to be dismasted and now the mast is over top of that life raft, or worse still, damages the canister and makes the life raft no longer operable. So give some thought to that. Obviously, the top photo there in my world is the best option. It's on the cockpit on a purpose-built bracket so that it can be easily deployed. I would also just say in regard to the valise one, the blue one in the bottom corner, 2 things. They're not UV stabilized, and this is a mistake I made only very recently when the chap I bought the life raft from responded to a photograph I'd posted of it saying you shouldn't have that thing outside all the time. It's not like UV stabilized. Wow, okay, I bought the wrong life raft. So the other thing about it was that when we had it stored inside with the view of deploying it on demand, I discovered Leanne couldn't lift it. She physically couldn't lift it out of the cockpit to get it to the side of the boat to deploy it because it was too heavy. So we dodged a bullet there, fortunately, but these are the things that are critical. And what else do you put in this life raft when you pack it? There's first aid instructions in the life raft. There's medical kits. There's flares and instructions on how to use the flares and what flares to use and when. But if you're like me and blind as a bat, none of that's going to be much good to you if you haven't got any reading glasses. So reading glasses are something that we get the manufacturer to pack into our life raft. Leanne has allergies that sometimes we don't know what's caused them, and eating some of the ration food in the life raft could potentially cause that to be a problem. So we have an EpiPen in the life raft just in case. If you had blood pressure medication that you needed to take, and you're going to be you could be in a very rapid abandoned ship situation here and find yourself in a life raft with none of your medication. So should you pack some of that in there? All of this stuff, give some thought to it. And then the grab bag. Of course, we can't get everything into our life raft. So what should be in yours? This is what's in ours. So that's our grab bag off of Songlines. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you what's in there. I've got a list of it that we provide those that do the course, and you can do your own Google search about it. But what else needs to be taken is more important, because you've packed all these things into the life raft, but there's things that you need to take that you also need to use on a daily or regular basis that you want to take with you should you need to jump off the boat into the raft. And those things, in our instance, are extra water, which we've got stored away ready to go. Handheld VHF. It's no good having it packed away in the grab bag and the battery being flat when we're out there trying to communicate with the aeroplane that's flying over top of us. So ours is on charge permanently when we're on passage. And there's a note on here that we need to grab it and stick it in there. The Iridium Go, because that's our ability to communicate. We're using the satellite connection that the Iridium Go provides, and without an iPhone or an iPad, it's useless to us. And of course the EPIRB, if someone's pulled it out of the bag to activate it, we need to make sure it's been put back in the bag before we go. So just some stuff to think about. At sea and offshore communication methods, there's voice data tracking equipment options up the wazoo. And you know, making an informed decision about this is an expensive process. You can have a single sideband radio. You can have a VHF radio, should it be DSC equipped. Your handheld VHF, should it have a GPS in it? Should it be DSC equipped? Do you not need an Iridium Go device, but you'd still like to be able to have a tracking device? And what's a more economical version of that, such as a yellow brick tracker or the InReach option? Again, these are all things you should research and make an informed decision about. For us, we're fortunate enough that Songlines and both of our previous boats have had single sideband radio installations in them. You have to do an operator's course to use that machine, and it's quite a challenging thing to use at times, but it does provide some great benefits. So we've got that and we use it. Not as much anymore, I must say, but we do have it and we use it. If I was buying a vessel and I didn't have one in it, I probably wouldn't spend the 12,000 bucks it's going to cost to put one in and get it going, but that's just me. The Iridium Go for me is the answer to all of our at-sea communications in regard to emergencies and getting weather and tracking and everything else. It's an all-in-one unit. We prefer it. We find the data is not prohibitive. So that's how we roll with that. But do your own research. Have a look at our website on the passage planning page there. There's some more information about those devices. Okay, preparing the vessel, electronic charts and navigation. I'm going to just run through this quickly, but again, most people, when we ask them, do you know that there's two types of charting software for electronic charts? There are vector charts and raster charts. And what's the difference? And why is that difference important? And basically, if you think of your vector chart is the electronic version of a chart. Your raster chart is an actual copy of a paper chart. So if you've grown up navigating on paper charts, or you've learned to navigate on paper charts, and you like the view and the information you can see on a paper chart, no matter what scale you've got your chart zoomed at, the raster chart is going to give you the same look. So for instance, if you were in the middle of the Coral Sea and you zoomed out to 600 mile, the Barrier Reef, the Great Barrier Reef of Australia, doesn't exist on a vector chart navigation system. As you zoom, it loses, the information disappears off it. On the raster chart, no matter what level of zoom you're on, you'll still have the reef showing. That's a big deal. And there have been a lot of groundings as a result of over zooming of charts. Again, do some research, know that there's different, know why there's a difference, and make a choice. We've made a choice, we run both. I don't run them all the time at sea, but I've got them ready on standby to go, and I've used them for my passage planning to identify potential issues. So you can see I've got them both running it simultaneously there on our chart plotter. Alrighty, radar or AIS, another one we're often asked, either or. Quick discussion about AIS accuracy and reliability. We all operate in our pleasure vessels a Class B AIS. The Class B AIS, the ships, for instance, run a Class A AIS. And as you can see in the map below, there's quite some clutter on that screen. Ships oftentimes can and they often do exclude Class B targets from their screen, aka our sailing boats. So they can just take us out of the equation when they're navigating in and around ports and harbours trying to get access into the port. which is not a big deal because they've got pilots on board, they've got spotters for Africa, they can see everything's good. But the instance does occur where they forget to put the Class B back on when they have exited the port, and all of a sudden now they're running around in the ocean and they don't have us on their screen. We always will make voice contact with a visual contact vessel. So if we see a ship whilst we're on passage, we will call him. We won't assume that he's seen us. We'll say, if we've got an AIS on him and his name's Big Ship, then we'll say, Big Ship, this is Songlines. We are da-da-da-da-da. Have you seen us? And oftentimes the response is stand by. What do you reckon that means, Greg?
They weren't looking.
They haven't seen us and they're now turning something on to see if they can see us. So just don't assume you've been seen, and don't assume that the AIS is going to be the be all and end all for that. And the other thing that interferes with, you'll see, I know again from our experience with the rally, some boats have got a 50-mile range, some have got a 2-mile range, some have got intermittent reception and transmission. And a lot of this comes down to the aerial type and the location of the aerial type and the installation. Just a quick tip is if you're going to put your AIS aerial on the top of your mast, it shouldn't be alongside your VHF aerial because it will interfere with the performance of the AIS aerial and critically impair its transmission and reception. So again, do some research on what sort of aerial for your AIS and where you should locate it. So radar, what's the advantage of radar if we have got AIS? Storm tracking and avoidance is my main criteria for having radar. We can see a storm cloud or a heavy skyline ahead of us and wind up the radar and gauge the intensity of that by the colours that we're seeing on our screen. We can also see which way it's moving, and we can adjust our course to perhaps avoid the worst of it. We can slow down to let it pass in front of us. We can make some informed decisions about how we're going to manage it. We can decide to just put all our sail away and let it go over top of us. We know these things in advance and we're not caught short. We are we're able to be proactive rather than reactive. And again, it saves torn sails and emotional scars. Target tracking is another thing. When the AIS isn't working, or we've got some of our wonderful fishing boats that we can't touch with and we see a light but we can't get a contact, we don't know which way this thing's going. We can always get him on the radar using a marker target and track his movements and know where he is, even though he's not showing up on our AIS. So either or aren't a replacement for either or. They both have their advantages, and their advantages over each other are significant. So again, we run both. Rigging for extended cruising and safety. Look, we all know we should get our rigging inspected. Ours is done every year before we depart. The rig on the boat's 5 years old. And you'll see a picture in the middle of the screen there. When we arrived at New Caledonia last year, I discovered that we had a broken strand on our starboard lower shroud. I didn't discover that by chance. I found that 2 days out of New Caledonia as a result of doing a rig inspection on the boat religiously daily. And I actually had to have a little screwdriver with me to pick at that rigging to see if it was broken, because it didn't actually show it broken. It showed a little line. When I saw the line, I went back and got a screwdriver, and lo and behold, it had cracked, but it was still in position. When I prized it away like that, I realized it was broken, and there was another 5 strands in there that were also broken. What did we do? We changed our sail approach. We lessened sail. We did some different things to take the load off the rig to make sure we got there. Again, we were able to be proactive and manage it rather than ending up like the boat in the picture on the right. And bear in mind, you don't need to be in a storm to lose your rig. It's a great article today in Yachting Monthly, Sailing Skills. That's where that image came from. And then, of course, you can get some more information on our website, Sales and Rigging. Okay, sails for offshore cruising. Look, we've chosen a three headsail rig here. We've got a staysail, which basically, well, I'll start at the beginning. We've got the screecher, which is the big white flappy thing out the front. That we can use in light air or sort of up to 15 knots to keep us moving along nicely. We then can come down to our genoa when we've got 15 plus, depending upon the wind angle, so forth and so on. And we can reef the genoa down to around about 30 knots or so. Then we can come down to our staysail and we can use our staysail. And we can reef our staysail down to, well, we have actually done it up to in excess of 40 knots. And all of this is done from the cockpit. We don't have to leave the safety of the cockpit in order to change the sail configuration of our vessel, and that goes for our main sail as well. We can have a full main down to a third reefed main and not leave the cockpit in order to put the reefs in or take them out. Again, for me, critical safety factor. Easy sail management for short-handed passage making. So, another thing to consider, sail choice. Emergencies in sea. What would you do if we got a broken window, or you had a barber hauler out on your head sail or something because you're running downwind, all of a sudden it broke and it smashed through one of your windows, and we're 3 days from land? Have you got a plan? You need to have a plan. This offshore cruising is all about preparing for the worst and hoping for the best. Walk around your boat, ask yourself, what would I do if? And then have an answer. And for instance, what would I do if this is a situation where the hatch have a broken port light in it, pre-cut timber, threaded rod, nuts and washers to suit, and a wing nut to be able to tighten it down with. All we needed was a drill. Bang, it's there, ready to go, and that is covered up. So we've got pre-cut timber for each window, for hatches, for port lights, ready for such an occurrence. And again, this happens. I don't know this as a result of being clever. I know it as a result of it happening to other people. Fortunately, touch wood, not me yet. Okay, anchors and anchoring. Secure your anchor on passage. Look, again, I've got stories up the wazoo here, but we have had boats that have not secured their anchor, and for whatever reason, it's managed to find its way out of the anchor, jips out of the bowsprit, and find itself dragging along the boat whilst in the ocean and trying to pound a hole in the side of it. Make sure you've got a method of securing that anchor on passage. Our boat's got a particular little trait with it where we've got a remote anchor winch that we can put the anchor up and down with, and it just happens to be right next to the electric halyard winch button. And again, we've had the instance where someone's pushed that anchor winch button thinking they were pushing the electric halyard winch, and tried to drag the anchor straight up through the front of the boat and destroy the winch and everything else. So I actually break the circuit breaker on that as one of my pre-passage checklists, and so that anchor winch is disabled on passage. This is the sort of stuff you might want to think about. Could that happen on my boat? We need a backup or a stern anchor if we were unlucky enough to lose our primary anchor or get fouled in coral or whatever it might be. We need to have a backup anchor. But it needs to be one that's up to the task, but not so heavy that we can't lift it, and not so heavy that we can't store it aboard. The Fortress aluminium anchor has a similar rating to some of the big Rockners and things, yet it is very light, and easy to use. It disassembles and goes away, or you can keep it assembled. It's our go-to backup, and it's our stern anchor if we want to be tied up with the back to a lovely palm-lined beach and swimming and having a nice time. And then storm anchors. If you've ever tried to deploy 2 anchors off the bow of your boat, one of the things that's consistent with storms is they typically go through from one quadrant to the next, and you may have it all set up lovely while it's blowing from the north, but then as the boat goes around into the south, both of those anchors become entangled and try and pull each other out of the bottom, and you find yourself no longer anchored. One of the solutions we've been shown and we've used is this tandem anchoring system. Again, research it yourself, do our Offshore Cruise Prep course, we'll explain it all to you, but have a plan for that and have the gear you need to do it. Water makers, are they essential for extended offshore cruising? Short answer for us is yes. We like to go to the remote locations in the southern lagoon in New Caledonia and spend weeks down there. And the last thing we want to do is have to come back and perhaps sail to a schedule, or worse, because we've run out of water and we can't get it. In this day and age, I just don't see a reason not to have a water maker. Even if you're going to be just doing this for one season, you can buy a portable Rainman water maker that will run off of your generator, or a portable generator. You get the whole setup for under 10 grand, and when you come home, you can sell it again. And typically, most of our rally participants are getting 70% of their investment back. So again, for me, it's a no-brainer. A water maker, I just wouldn't go home without it. Wouldn't leave home without it. Okay, batteries and charging systems. We need to know our demand versus our capacity. We need to know that we've got increased demand whilst we're on passage, and we need to know what our passive and non-passive charging options are. Again, one of the other failings that many of the boats have on the rally is that they don't have enough battery capacity, and they certainly don't have enough charging capacity. And when they start doing their overnight passages and the autopilot's on 24/7 and the chart plotter's on 24/7 and the navigation lights are on 12 hours a day and the computers are being charged and all the other stuff, all of a sudden they find their battery banks not up to it. And now the autopilot starts to fail because it's not got enough voltage to keep it running right, blah, blah, blah. It just goes on and on and on. You need to do a checkup on your boat to find out what your demand is. Then have you got the capacity and have you got the ability to charge it? Otherwise, you're going to find yourself camping rather than cruising. Turn that light off. Diesel engines and fuel systems. You need to be able to DIY, prob and shoot and repair these engines. Again, we're looking to go to remote locations to enjoy exactly that. A lot of that sort of problem shooting and repairs can be achieved through preventative maintenance rather than reactive maintenance. And a lot of the problems that are experienced come with fuel problems. You'll see a photo there of us loading jerry cans of fuel onto the boat and pouring it in with a funnel just below my hands. It's not a great photo, but the funnel you see down in the bottom right-hand corner is the funnel that I'm using. We religiously do not put fuel in our boat unless it's been through that funnel. We don't do that at the dock anymore because people tend to get cranky when it takes me an hour and a half to fill the boat up. So we do it in jugs and we fill up our 20 litre, not those ones that you see there, but our own 20 litre jugs, and we decant that into the boat so that I can make sure there's no water or bacteria going into my fuel system. Why? Because I've had it and it caused me a whole lot of grief and I never want to go through it again. The other thing I will share with you is the bottom left-hand corner is 2 zinc anodes that are worth about $12 each. Had I have known they were there, the next photo wouldn't be on the screen. Those 2 anodes were responsible for that engine overheating and detonating. Long story, but the bottom line is I could have avoided that situation had I have known that I needed to replace those 2 anodes every year. Do you know that about your engine? If not, get up close and personal with it. Get a service manual for it. Do some research about DIY problem shooting, preventative maintenance. You need to be able to do this stuff yourself when you go and do what you hope to do. Suggested essential items and spare parts for your engine. This is non-exhaustive, the list that's popping up in front of you here, but these are the things that we have had to replace at one time or another over the last 5 years on this boat alone, whilst we've been offshore cruising. And I would just give you a really good little tip here. I think it's a good little tip. When you buy a new spare part for your boat, most people, it's all shiny and lovely and they put it into the locker down below in the box that it came in and they never look at it again until it comes time to fit it. And guess what? When they go to fit it, it's the wrong one. Heard of that happening, Greg?
I'm just giggling in the background here.
So we and others that we know, again, I'm not a rocket scientist here. I've learnt this stuff from other people. I was encouraged when I buy new parts to fit them and leave them on. Why should I give the benefit of that new part to the next owner? Why shouldn't I have the joy of being able to turn the key and have it start every time for the next 2 or 3 years or 4 years, rather than me being the one that has to get down there on a hot day in a seaway and change that starter motor out? So we fit our new parts and we get our old parts either reconditioned or we clean them up and store them as our spare parts. That's how we manage our essential spares these days. Okay, tenders, storage at sea, big one this. Do you store yours below deck in a bag like that? Is it a fold-up roll-away one? If it is, that's awesome because it's just no drama whatsoever to you, but it's a big compromise when you're going to get to where you're going to go in regard to the performance and the pleasure you'll derive from it. Do you store it on deck? Not if you're on a catamaran, you don't. So what do we do if we're on a catamaran? And by the way, if you're on a monohull and you've got davits, and the ability to store that dinghy on deck, I would still encourage you to store it on deck. Why? Because we lost one that was on the davits on the way to New Zealand as a result of a pretty bumpy start to the passage and the jarring that was going on, and the davits literally sheared off the back of the boat in the middle of the night and everything was gone. There was too much weight on it at the end of the day and it was unnecessary. I could have had the dinghy on the bow and it wouldn't have happened. So I would still put my dinghy on deck, on passage, even though I had davits on a monohull. On a catamaran, I got no choice. So what do? We get it as light as possible. Outboards off, fuel tanks out, everything's out of the thing, and we've got multiple attachment points for it, so that if any of the fittings that are securing it fail, it's not going to, half of it's going to hang down into the water while we're careering along at 8 knots and filling up with water trying to tear the davits off the boat. No single point of attachment for that dinghy whilst it's up on the davits. There's multiple points of attachment to ensure fail-safe outcomes. So again, gives that some thought. Medical kits, you know, buy one that has actually got everything that you need. There's nothing worse at night, someone's cut their hand and we want to get a bandage, and we've got this lovely Tupperware dish that we open and tip up on the floor and everything's skating around everywhere and we can't find what we want. These offshore medical kits have got coloured pouches that if you know that if you've got a dressing or a wound to care for, it's going to be in the blue packet. We can just pull the blue packet straight out of the bag, leave the rest of it alone. If we're looking for medications, it's in the yellow one, and so on. Not expensive to buy, and you know, just a great piece of kit to have aboard your boat. Okay, we're drawing to a close for me here now. We're nearly there. There's a lot of things you're going to be buying for your boat over the coming time preparing it, as I've probably shown you here. A great resource for you is our website. If you want to pop into the services directory of our website, all of our rally partners are in there, and their products and services that we've found from people who we trust and we rely on to do the right thing for us personally. We use each and every one of these suppliers ourselves, and for our rally participants and or anyone else that's looking for things for your boat. So before you buy anything, jump on our website, have a look if we've got a contact there for you for what you're looking for. Destination research. Where are you going to find out what you need to know, including country-specific information like arrival and departure formalities, advance notification of arrival procedures. You may not be aware, but if you arrive in a country without having followed their advance notification of arrival procedure, which can include needing to send them pictures of the vessel and copies of passports prior to you arriving, and in a 48 or 96 hour time frame prior to your arrival, they can either deny you entry into the country or whack you with a significant fine, and this happens every season. Not knowing that you had to do it, ignorance is not bliss. So how do you find out these arrival procedures? This is a great website, Noonsite. You just type in your country, Australia, Fiji, New Caledonia, Port, wherever, and it'll give you all of the current and up-to-date arrival formalities for that country and what you need to do. It also gives you reports from other cruisers on destinations. It's about things like piracy or good anchorages or bad fuel, or it's just an awesome research for you to use to plan and then execute your offshore cruising. Okay, where are you going to go? Look, if you're looking for your first trip, we love New Caledonia. You can go there and discover the largest coral fringed reef lagoon in the world. It's relaxed, comfortable cruising after you've made your first passage. Can't recommend it highly enough as a destination. I would encourage you to research it and make your way over there. And then, of course, you can make your way onto Vanuatu, which is a whole nother experience. It's a different experience entirely. The cruising's nowhere near as relaxed or as comfortable, but the experience is just altogether different. One of them is a cruising experience, New Caledonia. The other one's a cultural experience. And I would encourage you to do both for different reasons. And it's not far away. We go from Australia, we've got a 780 nautical mile passage from the Gold Coast in the Green Line there across to Noumea. And then you can do little hops from Noumea over to Port Vila via the island of Tanna, a couple of 100 miles, and then 50 odd miles and up to the next island, another 80 odd miles to the next one, and all the way up to the top of Santo there. And then you can break your trip up on the way home into 2 legs of 500 odd miles apiece. So, you know, it's all doable. Information's all available to you on your website. going to need to know what gift items to take and trade. Again, do some research on this. New Caledonia, they've got a traditional gesture that you must follow in order to be welcomed and be able to enjoy your time visiting these locations. Just imagine someone pulls up in your backyard with their camper van and decides to stay there for 3 days and do everything they're going to do right in your backyard. Well, that's how it is in these villages with our boats. Those islands, anchorages are their backyards, and we need to respect them and get their permission to be there and find out what it is they are happy for us to or not do whilst we are there. They'll also give you some really good local information about whether there's been any shark activity or where the fishing's good. So that's New Caledonia. The same in Vanuatu, but the requirement is different. They don't have a traditional gesture. They like to trade. So try and give them trade value, things to trade that are of value to them, such as those listed on the screen here. Again, take a screenshot of it, or you'll be able to view this presentation again on demand, I believe, thanks to Multi-Hull Solutions and what they're going to do. So you can come back and have another look at it. Something that's a little bit close to my heart at the moment is this project Nakamal. I'd just like to tell you all a little bit about it. Cyclone Harold, as you know, went through Vanuatu last month, and it was devastating to the north of Vanuatu. The cruising community is normally there at this time of year, or starting to go over there at this time of year from New Zealand and Australia. And a lot of assistance is given to these people as a result of that when they're trying to recover from one of these events. Sadly, with COVID and the fact that nobody's going there at the moment, they are really in the poo. And the materials they need to rebuild their homes and things are available in Port Vila. So much aid has gone in there, but they can't get it from there out to these islands. There's no way to transport it because they often rely on transient vessels to do this transportation for them because they can't afford to pay for the cost of transportation. So we've come up with this project Nakamal thing. A Nakamal is a traditional building, much like a community centre, and it's typically used for the men to have their gatherings in and drink kava, and boys to sleep in and unmarried men to sleep in. But in times of crisis like this, the Nakamal becomes a community centre where everybody will take shelter from the weather whilst the rebuilding of their homes goes. Well, there's places where there isn't even a Nakamal left. So what we're trying to do here is raise the money to be able to transport the things that are needed to be able to at least build the Nakamals in these communities so these guys can get a roof over their head whilst they go about the business of rebuilding their homes. So Project Nakamal on Facebook, we've managed to raise $9,000 in the last 10 days of a goal of 10,000, but we certainly wouldn't say no if we exceeded that goal. So if you can spare a dime, it would be awesome if you could get involved with that. It's all over our Down Under Rally Facebook page. I'm sure you won't have trouble finding it. Okay, rally or not to rally? Why would you rally? Look, cruising in company, the community thing of it, the events that we put on, the experiences that we'll give you, the access to places that you normally wouldn't get access to. Look, there's 1,000 reasons to rally. I can't think of reasons not to rally, especially when our rally is a do what you like thing. You don't have to do anything. No one's going to growl at you if you decide you don't want to come to the event. No one's going to growl at you if you don't want to go to sundowners on the beach. There's no disadvantages in my mind apart from the fact that you have to pay me some money. And I'll tell you right here and now that I'll give you the best value for it that you could ever hope to get. So no disadvantage. And of course, I reckon, and people have told me repeatedly, that they save more than the rally entry fee in the discounts and deals they get from our rally partners as a result of being a rally participant. So to rally or not to rally, rally, baby. If you are keen to learn more about offshore cruising preparation, we run an offshore cruising preparation course, 2-day course in a classroom or a function room that we've been doing for the last 4 years. Because of COVID, we haven't been able to do them since February. We've taken this thing online. So we've recorded the last one, 2 full days of going over many, many topics and subjects. This thing's now available online on demand. There's over 10 hours of content broken up into 1-hour sessions that you can watch on demand as you get the time. You get 30 days to watch it. It's $295 Australian. At the end of the 30 days, you won't be able to get access to it again, but when you email us and tell us that you've completed it and we check up that you have, we'll send you a reference pack that is basically covering everything that we covered in that course for you to go back to refer to in the future. And because you were good enough to come along today and sit and listen to me waffle on all this time, we're going to give everyone that attended, well, the first 25 people anyway, that decide to take up this offshore cruising preparation course, 10% off that $295. You just need to use that promo code MHSW, so Multi-Hull Solutions Webinar 10 when you go to the website. It's all on the Down Under Rally website. You'll find it all there. So that's me. I'll shut up, except for answering questions. So please, guys, thank you so much. I hope you found this a worthwhile investment of your time, and I'm happy to answer as many questions as you would like to ask.
Well, thank you, John. That was incredibly informative. You packed an immense amount of information into that time frame, and I think, like most people, it again breaks open the fact that there's many more hours to learn. So the online course and all of the other information you've given there is invaluable. What I'd like to do is just say thanks now. So there will probably be some people who'd like to stay around for question time.
Sure.
So what we'll do is we'll do that. That way we don't have to rush you through question time. I'll just get you to jump ahead for a moment, and then we'll come back to the questions quickly. The slide, I think there's a slide there, just a reminder of those next webinars. So we've got the one next, it's all right if it's not there, John. The next webinar.
I can get it up for you, just one sec. There you go.
Yeah, thank you. It's the walkthrough next week. And then after that, as we said at the start, we've got the introduction to cruising the Mediterranean with Michael and Marita, who are patiently awaiting the delivery of their Elba 45. And then the week after that, the exciting one is to do a walkthrough on the Neil 51. And then the week after that, we've got Gordon and Louise. So for those of you who are busy and need to head off for the afternoon and go and do other things, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate the patronage of these webinars. We had up to 100 people with us today. And as we've mentioned, they are available, these webinars, to continue to go to our website and access. And then over probably in 3 or 4 weeks' time, we'll also be putting them on YouTube as on the Multi-Hull Solutions YouTube channel. So thank you, John, and thank you, Rachel. Very good, Rachel in the background there. And what we're going to do now is we're going to move along to a question and answer session. So understand that some people are going to head off, but we do have some great questions, and this way we can go as, I'm not saying go forever, but we can we don't have to simply rush off. So one of the first questions that came in was, do you know of any people using an agent to do the registration process and things like that? Like this was on one of your early slides, so you might want to flick through a couple of slides there. But do people use agents, or do most people self-manage their registration process?
So there's two purposes of agents, and I just make sure that I answer the question.
Yes.
That was being asked. There's to the Australian registration process, you're really not going to successfully be able to do it using an agent, because it's gathering of information that's about the boat and when you purchased it, and bills of sale, and whether it was a production boat, how many owners it's had, proving that the owners have all not owed money on the boat and that you own it. It's just a time-consuming task that's not difficult from a point of view of technicality. It's just time-consuming trying to get all the information together. So I'm not aware of people that have used agents to do that. Where people do use agents is often when they're not joining a rally, and they get an agent to do their inward clearance procedures and everything for them at the country of their arrival, so that they don't have to go deal with the immigration and customs in person. Sometimes when there's language barriers, if they're visiting a country that is perhaps, you know, French speaking and they don't speak English, then an agent becomes a very important part of the equation, so that they can communicate for you and do the things that need to be done. I hope that answers the question.
That's perfect. And then moving on to the next question from David. He's interested to know if you've used the drogue, a drogue on your cat, and if you have, did you tow it, and at what length?
I've not used the drogue. I haven't had the necessity to do it. Fortunately, I've managed to get the weather okay, so I haven't found myself in a situation to need to use it. So I haven't got personal experience with that.
No, that's all right. And sometimes it's good to say when you don't know.
I would just say that if you're taking a drogue and depending upon where you're going to be cruising, you probably should make sure that the vessel has got attachment points that are up to the loads that drogue is going to put onto it. It's one thing to learn how to use it, buy it, learn how to use it. It's another whole thing to make sure that it's not going to tear the back of the boat out when you attach it.
Understood. Good answer. I'm not sure if you answered it, but there's a question from Jan, or Jan, I should say. The personal AIS, you mentioned that you like the personal AIS. Does it self-trigger? Is it hydrostatically set off?
So there's a number of different ones, of course, like everything these days. Some of them are water activated. Some of them are manually activated. Some of them are water activated, and some of them are distance activated. So
Yes.
it's basically like a dog collar. And if the dog gets outside of the yard, it will immediately activate.
Okay, very good. And then this is a great question from Guy. He says, are the insurance companies looking at what level of courses and experience people have in relation to premiums before heading offshore? I think this is a question about, are the insurance companies actually looking at courses and experience? Are they looking at the amount of equipment that you've invested in? And are they looking and understanding the amount of preparation you've done?
In my experience, they're asking for your experience. So when you fill out your policy application, or when you apply for the insurance, they're going to ask your experience levels. Unfortunately, what we need to do now is sell ourselves to the insurance company as a risk. We've got to imagine, okay, I'm now the insurance company and I'm going to take that person on as a risk. Would I insure me for what I want to do? And if you answer that question honestly, if you say, yeah, I'd take $10,000 off that guy to insure him for $1 million because he's about to sail off over an ocean, you might start looking at, well, maybe I'm not that good a risk. So how do I prove to them that I'm not a bad risk? Yes, I've done my course. I've done a course. I've done these things. And all those things may not get you a reduction in premium, but they may be the difference between you actually getting cover and not getting cover.
Yeah, understood. And then I've also heard, and I don't want to open up the can of worms, but the insurance companies are also flexing, some of them are flexing their policies. So, you let them know when you are cruising and when you're not, and the premium is quite fluid, right?
Yeah, look, some of them will give a caveat for an offshore period of 6 months. So you might have your insurer for your local cruising and it's, you're only paying a $3,000 premium, but you want to go offshore for 6 months and they'll do a blue water extension.
Yes.
And it'll cost you $5,000 just for that 1 6 month period or whatever it might be. Look, the thing is to just ask the questions, but most people don't listen to the advice, but I can tell you that it's unlikely that your insurer, if you're dealing with one of the local insurances, Nautilus or Club Marine and these guys, that they're going to even entertain offshore insurance. It's not in their portfolio.
Yeah.
So, you're going to have to probably be looking at the players such as Pantanius and Topsail. We have a very good relationship with a broker in New Zealand that we've been using for the last 5 years, who will actually, a bit like the stuff they advertise on the TV, where you give them all the information and they'll go find the insurer that best fits your situation.
That sounds like a great idea.
And that's on our website under insurance in the services directory. I'd encourage you to contact those guys. It doesn't cost you anything, and they'll either help you or not.
Right, moving on. You can see how the questions are flowing in terms of they're tracking along with your presentation. Arno asked, what's expected for keeping a good night watch? What is expected from the crew? Because I think you mentioned about daytime is when it's good to get all your jobs done and all that. What's the expectation at night time out there?
Yeah, look, good question. And my expectation is it's multiple level, but primarily twofold. That person that's on watch, the designated watchkeeper, is to have no distractions. So if you're the watchkeeper, you don't get to read a book, you don't get to listen to a podcast, you don't get to have music playing on an iPod. You are at work and you are on the job, and the life of everybody on that boat is in your hands. So that's what I expect of them in that respect. I also expect them to do a 20-minute, every 20 minutes, a visual check of the horizon, and not just in front of them, but a 360-degree check, and we teach them how to do that effectively, so that they don't miss anything, because we're not sitting in the broadwater. These boats are going up and down. We could be in a 2-metre swell, and it's very easy for a boat that's 12 miles away from us. We can get a sight of it, but their navigation, their lights will disappear as they go down into a trough and reappear. And so you've got to keep a very good watch at all times, and that's not just sitting in the chair looking out the front. And then I'm asking them to be very attentive to the boat. By that I mean I want them to be listening. If you hear something during your watch that you didn't hear at the beginning of your watch, or you see something that looks different about the boat during your watch that you didn't see at the beginning of the watch, please let me know, because that could be, I like to say the boat talks to you, and you ignore it at your peril. There's rarely been a situation that we've had a problem that couldn't have been avoided if I had have paid attention to something that was trying to tell me that was about to happen.
Very good point. Yeah.
So yeah, that's look. There's more than that, but that's a couple of points.
Yeah, great. Michael brought up a great one, and you did cover on it a bit. But he asked, can we talk about skipper communications and the importance of that, as in leadership versus dictatorship?
Yeah, look, and again, I'm not trying to sell this course. It's just that it comes straight to my head. We go into that in a lot of detail in the course. And there must be a captain, but for the captain to be effective, he must have a crew. And if he doesn't communicate well, he ain't going to have a crew. Yeah. So, you've got to make sure that you are communicating in a manner that is both direct, but instructive and considerate. I try and always apply the principle of how would I feel if someone said that to me when I'm giving instruction or suggesting change. And look, it's hard. You're often tired. You're often in a situation and you're as frightened or as ill-equipped to deal with it as the person that's freaking out about it and that you're freaking out at. And a lot of the time, what happens in the oceans needs to stay in the ocean.
Very good, but I think it's a great point from Michael that so much about how, whether it be on a boat or anywhere, it's just that social management as well as the weather and everything else. Managing the social aspect is so important, isn't it?
Absolutely right. And we don't prescribe to blue or pink jobs, by the way. A lot of people talk about blue and pink jobs on boats. Yes. It's a team effort. And what I believe is that, if we're shorthanded, everybody should be able to not do everything as well as each other, but at least get through.
Yep. Okay, a quick one here. What cover and mount do you use for your iPad?
That's from the Joy factory. So it was actually originally designed to help disabled people in their wheelchairs to be able to have voice communications with it, yada, yada, yada. So if you just Google Joy factory,
wow, okay,
and it becomes a mount kit. So there's a telescopic arm that you can change the position of, and a waterproof case that comes with that, that you can put onto a rail like mine's mounted on, or you can put on a suction cap, or there's a whole lot of different options there. So just Google Joy factory, and then kits or packages or whatever, you'll see it all there.
Fantastic information. Okay, and then someone also asked, or Dean asked, what about FLIR, the FLIR cameras for nighttime visibility of unlit fishing boats, etc.? Have you ever had any experience with, the night vision goggle type arrangement?
I haven't personally, but again, we've cruised with a lot of people who've got different budgets to us. And one of my mates, or a person that's now my mate, has got the FLIR thing, and it was absolutely unreal. It was the one that was the literal FLIR one that was mounted on one of his spreaders. And it was unreal. I mean, there's no other way to describe it, but this stuff all uses power and it all costs money. Can you do it without it? Absolutely. Is it nice to have it? Absolutely.
No, very good. Okay, here's a thank you here on the way through from Peter. He said, thanks, John and Greg. I'm pretty experienced boating and cruising, but lots I needed to remember. And John, you've done a great job of refreshing. So that was someone who had to sort of depart the scene earlier in the presentation. Thank you. I think that's about it. And then, sorry, no, there is some other questions. That's incorrect, Greg. So Arno asked, how do you choose the crew? And I felt like typing back to you, Arno, saying, how long is a piece of string? I'm not sure how.
Is Arno still there?
It's a good question. Yeah, Arno is still there, I think. So hang on, I'll just check. I'm pretty certain he's still there.
Anyway, someone else might want to know.
Yeah, Arno is still there. Yes.
So Arno, there's several ways of doing that. There's a website called Crew Finder. There's a website called Find a Crew. And you register as the vessel that is looking for crew members, and you put a criteria in there of what you're looking for. And, you know, they're commercially operated. Some of them you have to pay a fee for. And, you know, you just do a process of elimination. We also, with the rally, have a number of people that ask us for crewing opportunities. A lot of people do our offshore cruising prep course and then say, look, we really don't feel confident to go on our own boat on our own yet. We've got experience where we would like to go with someone else. Is there any crew opportunity? So we have a crew available page where people register for free as available crew members, and they interact with the people on the boats that are participants of the rally that are looking for crew. So that's another resource we provide. There's Facebook crew finder pages. Putting a notice in a laundry in a cruising marina is a really good way of saying that you're looking for crew people to come for a ride with you up the coast or wherever it might be. You know, there's several different ways.
So Arno, if you're still there, just let us know if that was the question you were asking, and if not, let us know. But I think you've answered that really well. Dean Robinson said, we've heard wind generators are noisy. Are they getting better these days?
Yeah, this is a subject that's close to my heart. I am going through a constant process to try and find one that's not noisy. Now, having said that, my last one was a silent wind Airex. No, sorry, not silent wind, it was an Airex. And it had the original black blades on it, and it was as noisy as you could expect it to be. The wind noise through the blades was just overbearing. Anyone downwind of me moved because they couldn't put up with the noise. And even in the boat itself, it was too noisy. Then we changed them to the blue silent blades on it, and it improved it by 50%. I blew that one up on the way over to Fiji last year. When I say I blew it up, it just met its end. It was old. And we've just replaced that with a Rutland 1200 after doing a lot of research. And I'm not, you know, we are very, very happy with that Rutland 1200. It meets our budget. There's probably others that are even quieter than it that you can spend more money on. The one that comes to mind is the D400, which is just about, you know, from all my experience, feedback I've got from people is that you can't hear it at all. Our Rutland, you can't hear the wind noise from it, but I am having some harmonic noise transmission through the mount system that it's on. And I think it's because my davits are alloy and they're causing a harmonic noise. So, you know, the wind generator itself is very, very tolerable and pleasant. The mounting of it is critical. Very good.
The next question relates to clearing into countries. You were talking about preparation, and what sort of documentation do you need to have on the boat when you arrive in a new country? I suppose this is about things like registration papers.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah,
good question. And it's subjective per country, but as a bare minimum, you'll need your original copy of your Australian registration certificate. So just, I'll emphasize original. Again, I know of people that have spent, you know, $2,000 and 3 months of their life getting it, and they didn't want it. They want to make sure they never lost it. So they took a photocopy and left the original in their safe at home. When they got to the other side, they had all sorts of drama because it was a photocopy. So the original copy of documentation.
What about things like bills of sale for the purchase of the boat and all that? Is that something you have?
No, that's the joy of the Australian registration certificate.
Yes.
That one document proves ownership unequivocally of that vessel.
Yep.
And if you are the master of the vessel but not the owner, you are actually, disclosed on that document as being the vessel master. So that document negates the need for those things. Original copies of passports, obviously you need to have those. Typically they're the two key things that are consistent with every country: the original ship's registration and original copies of passports. And a crew list is the other thing.
And who knows, as we move forward in time, it might also be a health certificate.
Well, New Caledonia has, for the last 2 years, they won't allow you in there without travel insurance that provides for repatriation as well as recuperation and medication. So you've got to have a travel insurance policy, or they just won't stamp you in. You get told to leave.
Interesting. Okay, we'll move along. The next one is, Trevor's asked, obviously, are there also things you can't bring into various countries like alcohol and medicine? And probably sticking to your part of the world in terms of the South Pacific, is there any areas where they crack down on you with what you have on board?
Yeah, look, every country has got their, and again, this is a good thing about the Moon site. They typically will tell you what the biosecurity and customs requirements are for that country broadly. And it does change, especially the biosecurity stuff changes depending on the environment at the time. But there's certainly alcohol, for instance, because it was mentioned. I don't know of any country that doesn't have an amount of alcohol that is a restricted level. So you can only take in 2 litres of spirits, a litre of wine, 2 boxes of beer, or whatever it might be in that country. Having said that, as a rally organiser, I inform our participants of exactly what they are required to do in order to meet the requirements of the country they're visiting. As a cruiser myself, I will say that we have always got more alcohol on the boat than we're supposed to have. And we always declare it, and we've never been challenged because we've declared it. One of the key things, customs in particular, because of the drug trafficking that's been happening with yachts in the past, are very, very astute about is if you lie to them about something and they found out that you've lied to them, then you are a liar, and they will want to know what else you've been lying to them about. If you disclose to them what you've done wrong, typically it's not a problem. Having said that, I know in French Polynesia, they bonded. So a couple of boats across the Pacific didn't drink as much on the way as they thought they would. That's the nicest way of saying it. And when they arrived in French Polynesia, they had significantly more alcohol than they should have had. And the customs bonded it. So basically they taped up, put it all into a box and taped it all up and left it on the boat. And they had to show that when they cleared out of the country that that alcohol hadn't been consumed. Otherwise, they would have had to pay an import duty on it.
Yep, understood. Now, Stephen asked a question, where do you find info on the first topic, Australian registration versus just state registration? Stephen, I just posted a link to you there of the amsa.gov.au page for vessel and ship registration, which is to get your vessel Australian registered or become an Australian registered ship. John, do you mostly ask people when they're doing these crossings with you and the rallies that they are an Australian registered ship? Is that the case?
Every vessel that leaving Australia for overseas that is an Australian owned vessel has to be, and yes, it is a prerequisite. You can join our rally and not have it, but you certainly aren't going to leave when we leave. So yes, it's a prerequisite. Just quickly backing up to the previous question there on medication, I know I only answered alcohol. Short answer, if you have prescription medication and you should take your prescriptions and or a letter from your doctor to justify that you've got some of those medications on board the boat, because in some instances they will be banned substances.
Yes.
So very important to take your prescriptions and or letters from doctors. And it's also important if you're on supplements, natural supplements, vitamins and things, and you're on a specific dosage of it, that you actually take that with you, because you may not be able to buy the same product or the same dosage rate in the country that you're visiting. And again, a letter from your doctor, if they've recommended you taking, like me, 1,000 milligrams of B3 a day, I can't get 1,000 milligram tablets in New Caledonia. So I take those with me. I've got a letter to substantiate it. And keep the stuff all in its original packaging. Don't go taking it out and putting it in your pillboxes.
Okay, and I'm just going to jump back to, I'll just keep going. Arno, I've seen your reply. I'll come to that in a minute. I thought that might be the case. I'll just ask, Trevor's asked a question there. What sort of skipper qualifications are required? That's an interesting one, John.
I'm assuming to
go offshore, to go from Australia to another country on a yacht. Yeah.
Required, there aren't any.
I know, I understand. Yes.
If
you want to charter a boat, if you want to go and charter a boat in Greece, you've got to go and get a skipper's qualification. But if you want to sail your own boat from Australia across the Pacific, you don't need it.
And look, there's the fors and against of this. In New Zealand, for instance, if you're on a New Zealand registered vessel and you want to leave New Zealand, you have to undergo a Category 1 inspection by a third party and have it signed off before they'll issue you your outward clearance certificate. Some people find that demonstrative. I think it's a great idea. But in Australia, if you've got an Australian registered rowboat, you can leave the country.
Yeah. Now, it's an interesting one. However, we always say that for peace of mind and for you to get on with your crew and create that social stability, it probably is nice that whoever's in charge at least is able to say, well, look, I've done training and I have a certificate.
Yeah, look, and yes, absolutely. To do what we do is it's not an undertaking to be taken lightly. I mean, no. It should be a very pleasant experience, and most of the time it is, but there is so many variables. And if you, more so than being a qualified skipper, it's being a seaman and being prudent. And making sure that you've identified what can go wrong. And it goes back to my comment of, do you know what you don't know? You need to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And by preparing for the worst, I mean, find out what can go wrong, work out how you're going to respond to it and overcome it. That's probably the most important advice I could give anyone, rather than saying you should go and do a RYA skipper's course or whatever. I'm not saying don't do that. I mean, that's valuable as well, but know what you don't know.
Yep. Very good information. Arno, I thought this is where you were going. He says, thanks for answering, but I mean, how do you select the people? If you have 5 people interested, you just need 2 people on your crew. How do you choose them? It's a really good question. And have you ever had this issue, John, about who to choose to go?
Hey, Arno, pick the pretty ones. Look, I've never had 5. I've had dozens of people interested, but by the time we get into the qualification criteria, and by that I mean, okay, where you need to be ready to leave here on the 1st of May. However, we won't be leaving before the 6th of May, and we may not leave until the 23rd or 24th or 25th or even the 1st of June, because it's all going to be weather dictated, independent. So have you got 4 weeks of your life, bare minimum, that you don't have to be anywhere and do anything, and you can sustain and support yourself for that period of time? Immediately out of those 12, 6 are gone. Yeah. So now we're down to the next 6. And then we start talking about, okay, have you got a PFD that's adequate, suitable? Have you got a personal AIS? Have you got this, that, and the other? No, well, that's all going to cost you about $1,500. I'm out. So now we're down to 2.5 people. It just, yeah, look,
But then would it be fair to say, John, then of the 2.5 that are left, you then got to go and do the pub test. You've got to go and work out if you're actually compatible.
So then we take them sailing. And we take them, we put the people, we don't take people to sea anymore without having had them on the boat at least overnight and done some sailing with them. And then we've got zero. So now we have to start again.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got to go out and work out if they're going to fit into your world and you fit into theirs compatibly, yeah?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just see one there come up from Anonymous and about providing a list of crew website.
I think that you can do that with Google, can't you?
And look, I'm happy to do it if you wanted to email me. I can send you the ones that I've used. I can reply to you in an email. You can just go onto our website and do a general submission through the contact us, and I'm more than happy to answer that question.
And then the last question from Colin, and I think the answer to Colin is Moonsite, yes?
Yes, yeah. Just for instance, are you thinking about New Caledonia and?
Oh, sorry. The question for everyone is: do you have a list of countries with their tax-free period? Sorry about that.
And no, I don't have an exhaustive list, but you can get it from Moonsite, and you will also get it from each country when you go on to. So Moonsite's going to tell you what's listed, and they're also going to give you the contact information for that country's customs websites, such as Vanuatu Customs, New Caledonia Customs. And in those locations, it'll tell you. But to give you an idea, New Caledonia, you can have your boat there for 1 year and any 3-year period. So that means if you go for 6 months this year and 6 months next year, you can't go back for another 2 years until you've clocked up to 3 years again. Then you can go back for 1 year and any 3 years. New Zealand, you can be there for 2 years without having to import the boat. Fiji is 18 months, and then you can leave and come straight back and get another 18 months.
And French Polynesia is 3 years. Did you say that just then?
No, that was.
So we often talk to people about the concept of, you might just want to write down Colin's email address, or I'll take that. But we've got people who we suggest to them, we say, why don't you have the boat shipped or delivered professionally to Tahiti and start your cruising from there, because you can stay there for 3 years, or the boat can, before you then start coming west across the Pacific, you know. So
Absolutely.
you're right. You can sail the Pacific for a number of years and maintain a tax-free perspective with your yacht, yeah?
Oh, absolutely. And look, just on that, the boats that I'm seeing available, and I think this is going to happen more and more up in your Southeast Asia district, there's going to be some very good opportunities. Well, a lot of what happens there, just for those that are still on and interested, these boats come across the Pacific with a goal to cruise the world. They've left the Med, they've come down the Atlantic, they've crossed the Pacific, they've got to Australia, and they're tired of it. Or they get up into Indonesia and they go, oh, wow, we've got to do the Red Sea and all the pirate area, and we're not really on it. We've seen the best of it. We really wanted to just do the islands and the palm trees. We might sell the boat here in Asia. You know, Indonesia as a cruising ground is sensational, and outside of cyclone affected area, you can hang out in Southeast Asia between Thailand, Malaysia and Indonesia for years and fly backwards and forwards economically. You can leave the boat now in a great marina in Indonesia at Marina del Rey, and it's only 20 minutes from the ferry over to the airport, and cruise Indonesia every season for 6 months and leave the boat there. You know, buy the boat up there and get it back down to Indo. Don't even bring it back home. Just have it as the
trade winds to get you there up the Queensland coast.
Yeah. I mean, it's awesome.
So listen, John, that's it now. We've exhausted all the outstanding questions there. Amazingly, after 2 hours, we've held on to 40 people watching. It's obviously a topic that for some people they'll just can't get enough. So that's fantastic. So we're going to wrap this up now. Thank you very much. I'll give you a virtual round of applause from everyone. And if you had one last thing to add, and otherwise we'll very shortly press finish on today's webinar.
Mate, all I'd like to add is a sincere and humble thank you to Multi-Hull Solutions for giving me the opportunity to do this, and for providing people with the opportunity to get this information. What you do to support people's dreams and build their dreams, I mean, not everyone that was on this thing is going to buy a boat from you or have bought a boat from you. I hope they do, but I'm sure they won't. But you've provided your time and this resource for free, and you should be congratulated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you in the background, Rachel. And looking forward to the next few weeks of webinars. So on that note, thank you, John. Well done. Fantastic effort. And we'll speak again soon. Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Sunline's out.